The Lincoln wheat penny is widely considered one of the most recognizable and historically significant coins ever produced by the United States Mint. First introduced in 1909 to commemorate the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth, this iconic design replaced the long-running Indian head cent and fundamentally changed American coinage by featuring a real historical figure rather than an allegorical representation of liberty. Designed by Victor David Brenner, the obverse bears the familiar portrait of the 16th president, while the reverse displays two gracefully curving wheat stalks flanking the denomination, symbolizing national agricultural prosperity. For exactly 50 years, the wheat penny served as the backbone of everyday American commerce, passing through the hands of citizens during world wars, economic depressions, and periods of unprecedented national growth. While billions of these copper coins were struck and eventually lost to circulation, a small fraction survived in remarkable condition, transforming ordinary pocket change into highly coveted historical artifacts. Today, serious numismatists understand that the true value of a Lincoln wheat penny is never determined by its age alone, but rather by a complex intersection of original surface preservation, striking characteristics, minting variations, and authenticated rarity. As we examine four specific dates from this legendary series, you will discover why certain examples have been relegated to the bargain bins of history, while others have commanded extraordinary attention and premium valuations in the competitive arena of high-end numismatic auctions. 1918. Lincoln wheat penny. The year 1918 represents one of the most turbulent and defining periods in modern history, and the Lincoln wheat penny, struck during this era, carries the physical weight of that monumental time. As the United States was heavily entrenched in the final brutal months of World War I, the American economy was operating under extreme wartime pressures. Factories were operating around the clock, resources were being strictly rationed, and a devastating global influenza pandemic was simultaneously sweeping across the nation, severely impacting the workforce. Despite these overwhelming domestic and international challenges, the United States Mint was tasked with producing an enormous volume of coinage to sustain the daily economic transactions of a mobilized country. The 1918 Lincoln wheat penny struck at the Philadelphia facility, identifiable by its deliberate lack of a mint mark beneath the date, was produced in staggering quantities to meet this demand. The Philadelphia Mint churned out millions of these cents, adhering to the traditional French bronze composition that had defined the series since its inception. This specific metallurgical formula consisted of 95% copper combined with 5% tin and zinc. Each freshly struck planchet was designed to weigh precisely 3.17 grams, measure 19.05 millimeters in diameter, and feature a completely smooth plain edge. However, the sheer volume of production and the frantic pace of the wartime minting process inevitably took a toll on the equipment. Because the mint was maximizing output while potentially dealing with material shortages and an overworked staff, the working dies used to strike the 1918 cents were often pushed far beyond their ideal lifespan. As a direct result, experienced numismatists understand that finding a 1918 Lincoln wheat penny with a razor-sharp, fully executed strike is an incredibly difficult endeavor. A typical circulation strike from this year often displays noticeable softness in the highest points of the design. Collectors scrutinizing these coins pay careful attention to the intricate parallel lines at the very top of the wheat stalks on the reverse, as well as the fine details in President Lincoln's hair, his cheekbone, and the subtle lines of his bow tie on the obverse. When dies were overused, these critical design elements were often the first to lose their definition, resulting in coins that looked slightly worn even the moment they fell from the coinage press. This inherent manufacturing inconsistency is what makes a fully struck, gem-quality 1918 cent such a magnificent rarity today. When evaluating surviving examples, professional grading services utilize the internationally accepted Sheldon grading scale to assess the coin's condition, but they also assign a crucial color designation to copper coins, which drastically influences market demand. Because copper is a highly reactive metal, it naturally oxidizes and darkens as it interacts with the environment. Moisture, and the oils from human skin. Therefore, coins are classified as brown, red brown, or full red. A 1918 Lincoln wheat penny that circulated heavily and turned a dark chocolate brown is a fascinating historical keepsake, but it holds very little monetary premium, often trading for just a few dollars. However, the narrative shifts entirely when discussing a coin that was somehow pulled from production, carefully stored away from the elements, and preserved in its original fiery mint state. A certified 1918 Lincoln Watt penny, graded mint state 67 full red, is a numismatic treasure that attracts fierce bidding from registry-set competitors. Such a coin, boasting uninterrupted cartwheel luster, flawless surfaces devoid of distracting contact marks, and a bold, authoritative strike, can easily command thousands of dollars at major auction houses. Beyond absolute condition, specialists also meticulously search for genuine mint errors that may have escaped the Philadelphia facility's quality control during the chaotic wartime production. While major die varieties are scarce for this specific year, collectors occasionally encounter dramatic off-center strikes where the planchet was not properly seated in the collar, or clipped planchets caused by the misfeeding of the copper strip during the blanking process. Authentic errors from the teens are highly prized, but they require rigorous third-party authentication, as unscrupulous individuals often attempt to replicate these anomalies through mechanical manipulation. Ultimately, the 1918 Lincoln wheat penny stands as a resilient survivor of a world at war, rewarding those collectors who possess the patience to seek out the very finest authenticated examples. 1937, Lincoln wheat penny. Nearly 2 decades later, the American landscape had transformed dramatically. In the 1937 Lincoln wheat penny emerged during a time of fragile economic recovery. The United States was slowly climbing its way out of the depths of the Great Depression, a devastating financial collapse that had fundamentally altered the daily lives of millions of citizens. Under the administration of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, sweeping economic reforms and federal programs were attempting to stimulate commerce and put the American workforce back on its feet. As businesses began to stabilize and consumer spending saw a modest increase, the demand for small change surged. To facilitate this growing everyday commerce, the United States Mint ramped up production, and the Philadelphia Mint was responsible for striking an immense quantity of pennies in 1937. Like its predecessors, the 1937 issue lacked a mint mark and adhered to the classic standard composition of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc, maintaining the traditional 3.17 gram weight. Because mintage figures were remarkably high, the 1937 Lincoln wheat penny is considered an exceedingly common coin in lower circulated grades. Millions of these pennies remained in circulation for decades, passing through grocery stores, movie theaters, and the pockets of generations of Americans, gradually wearing down to smooth, darkened discs of copper. However, the sheer abundance of circulated specimens creates a fascinating illusion of commonality that completely dissolves when collectors seek out coins in the ultimate states of preservation. By 1937, the United States Mint had refined many of its striking procedures, and the quality control was generally superior to the wartime production of the late teens. Consequently, finding a well-struck 1937 penny with sharp details on Lincoln's portrait and crisp, distinct lines on the reverse wheat ears is far less challenging than finding a comparable 1918 example. Yet, the barrier to astronomical value in the 1937 issue, it is not merely finding a nice strike, but rather discovering a coin that has survived the ensuing decades absolutely untouched by time or human hands. The copper surfaces of a penny are notoriously unforgiving. Even a microscopic droplet of moisture, a faint fingerprint, or slight friction from being stored in a canvas bag can permanently diminish a coin's eye appeal and knock it out of the top-tier grading classifications. Modern numismatists and registry set builders do not just want an uncirculated 1937 penny, they demand sheer perfection. They are looking for the elusive Mint State 67 or Mint State 68 full red examples. When a 1937 Lincoln wheat penny achieves a certified grade of MS68 red, it means the coin possesses essentially flawless surfaces, blinding original mint luster that dances across the fields when rotated in the light, in a perfectly centered hammering strike. The population of such elite coins is astonishingly low. When one of these undisputed masterpieces crosses the auction block, it ceases to be a simple piece of pocket change and becomes a heavily contested financial asset, often realizing several thousands of dollars as advanced collectors battle to add the ultimate specimen to their portfolios. Furthermore, the 1937 production year is also notable for the presence of certain intriguing mint anomalies and die varieties. While the 1937 Philadelphia issue does not boast a blockbuster variety on the level of the legendary 1955 double die, dedicated variety hunters constantly examine these coins under powerful loops, looking for repunched dates, subtle die breaks, and minor doubling on the obverse lettering. The presence of a recognized, authenticated variety can add a substantial premium to a high-grade coin. However, the greatest threat to collectors remains the existence of artificially altered coins. Coins that have been chemically dipped, harshly cleaned with abrasive polishes, or artificially toned to simulate original red surfaces are aggressively rejected by professional grading companies. The experienced collector knows that true value lies exclusively in untouched originality, making proper storage in inert, archival quality holders absolutely imperative to preserve the coin's legacy for future generations. 1945, Lincoln Wheat Penny. As the world celebrated the long-awaited conclusion of the Second World War, the 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny was quietly struck, bearing within its very metallurgical makeup the story of the nation's massive wartime effort. The year 1945 was a monumental turning point in human history, marking the defeat of the Axis powers and the dawn of the atomic age. During the height of the conflict, the United States military required vast quantities of copper for the production of ammunition, electrical wiring, and communication equipment. To conserve this critical resource, the United States Mint had famously altered the penny's composition in 1943, creating the zinc-coated steel cent. However, the steel pennies proved highly unpopular with the public due to their tendency to rust and their confusing resemblance to silver dimes. In 1944, the Mint sought a better solution, and the government began gathering spent brass artillery shell casings from military training facilities and battlefields. These salvaged casings were melted down, supplemented with additional copper, and used to mint the cents of 1944 and 1945. Therefore, the 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny is not struck in the traditional French bronze. Instead, it is composed of a unique wartime alloy consisting of 95% copper and 5% zinc, completely omitting the tin that was normally present in the standard formula. This specific shell casing bronze composition gives the 1945 pennies a distinct identity. While they retain the standard 3.11 gram weight and 19.05 millimeter diameter, the absence of tin and the impurities sometimes found in the recycled artillery shells occasionally cause slight variations in the way the metal flowed during the striking process. Sometimes these coins exhibit a subtly different hue or a slightly brassy appearance compared to pre-war issues. More importantly, the use of recycled shell casings frequently led to poor alloy mixing. As a result, the 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny is somewhat notorious among collectors for displaying lamination errors. A lamination error occurs when impurities in the metal cause the surface of the planche to separate, crack, or peel away like layers of an onion. While severe lamination flaws are highly collectible and provide a fascinating window into the wartime manufacturing constraints, they fundamentally compromise the structural integrity of the coin surface. Because the Philadelphia Mint produced over 1 billion of these cents in 1945 to accommodate a booming economy, rarity is entirely dependent on phenomenal preservation. Evaluating a 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny requires a critical eye. Because the mintage was so astronomically high, ordinary circulated examples, even those grading extremely fine or about uncirculated, hold virtually no premium and are commonly found in bulk lots. The collector market exclusively focuses on the extreme upper echelon of certified grades. Finding an MS66 red is relatively common and affordable, but pushing into the MS67 red or MS67 plus red territory becomes a serious challenge. The high-speed production presses in 1945 often resulted in planchets that were not perfectly struck, leaving softness in the high points of Lincoln's jaw or the very tips of the wheat ears. Additionally, the shell casing alloy can sometimes tone in unpredictable ways, developing dark carbon spots or uneven coloration over the decades. A certified MS67 Plus full red example must possess a liquid-like, flawless luster, zero distracting carbon spotting, and a definitive crisp strike. When these rare attributes align in a single authenticated piece, the coin becomes a prized registry asset, commanding impressive auction figures. The 1945 penny is a literal piece of salvaged wartime history, a copper disc that connects the triumph of the American military effort directly to the commerce of the post-war era, demanding respect and meticulous preservation from anyone fortunate enough to possess a pristine survivor. 1946. D. Lincoln Wheat. Wheat penny, with the war finally over, 1946 ushered in a massive wave of optimism, suburban expansion, and economic prosperity across the United States. The troops had returned home, factories transitioned from building tanks and bombers back to manufacturing automobiles and household appliances, and the nation settled into the greatest period of middle-class growth in its history. Reflecting a return to peacetime normalcy, the United States Mint abandoned the recycled shell casing alloy and quietly returned to the traditional pre-war French bronze composition for the Lincoln Wheat penny. Once again, the coins were struck utilizing the classic formula of 95% copper, backed by 5% tin and zinc, restoring the metallic standard that had been interrupted by the global conflict. The 1946 D Lincoln Wheat penny, bearing the distinctive D mint mark proudly positioned just beneath the date on the obverse, was struck at the Denver Mint in Colorado. The Denver facility played a crucial role in supplying coinage to the rapidly expanding western and midwestern regions of the country, producing hundreds of millions of these pennies to fuel the post-war consumer boom. The Denver Mint historically maintained a strong reputation for producing coins with excellent strike quality, often surpassing the sharpness of their Philadelphia counterparts. However, the sheer volume of coins required in 1946 meant that dies were still used extensively, creating a wide spectrum of quality among surviving examples. While identifying the 1946 D is simple enough, evaluating its true numismatic potential requires profound attention to detail. Most 1946 D cents entered circulation immediately, acting as the lifeblood of the new economy, buying newspapers, operating gumball machines, and filling the cash registers of newly opened businesses. These circulated pieces, worn to varying shades of dull brown, are historical relics but possess negligible financial value. The numismatic spotlight is fiercely focused on those exceptional specimens that manage to avoid the abrasions of commerce entirely. A premier 1946 D must exhibit explosive original cartwheel luster that rolls smoothly across the copper surfaces without interruption. The strike must be forceful enough to fully render the intricate lines of the wheat stalks on the reverse and the subtle contours of Lincoln's coat and hair on the obverse. When a coin meets these stringent criteria and is encapsulated in a tamper-evident holder by a respected third-party grading service with a grade of MS67 red, it transitions from a common commodity to a highly sought-after rarity, often realizing significant sums at elite numismatic auctions. Beyond impeccable condition, the 1946 D Lincoln Wheat penny is deeply beloved by variety specialists due to the well-documented presence of repunched mint marks, commonly referred to as RPMs. During this era, mint marks were not incorporated into the master die. Instead, they were individually hand-punched into the working dies by mint engravers using a steel mallet. This manual, human-driven process naturally invited errors. If the engraver struck the punch with insufficient force on the first attempt, or if the punch bounced slightly, a second strike was required. If the punch was not perfectly aligned over the initial impression, a secondary overlapping mint mark was created. The 1946 D issue features several recognized RPM varieties, where traces of a prior D can be clearly seen protruding from beneath the primary mint mark, often visible to the north, south, or slightly rotated. Furthermore, this year is famous for an even more dramatic anomaly. The overmint mark, OMM, where a D was mistakenly punched over an S, intended for the San Francisco Mint. These authenticated varieties are intensely pursued by dedicated collectors, adding a thrilling layer of discovery to what might otherwise appear to be a standard pocket coin. However, discovering these varieties requires high-powered magnification and an expert understanding of minting characteristics, as mechanical doubling or post-mint damage can easily deceive an untrained eye. The 1946D stands as a testament to American manufacturing and at the dawn of a new era, reminding us that careful observation, professional authentication, and an appreciation for flawless preservation are the true keys to unlocking the extraordinary value hidden within the ordinary Lincoln wheat penny.